The evening rush at Bellini's restaurant was in full swing. Crystal glasses clinked, silverware tapped against fine china, and the low hum of conversation filled the warm air. It was the kind of place where a meal cost more than what most people made in a day. White tablecloths, fresh flowers on every table, and waitstaff who seemed to appear exactly when needed and vanish when they weren't. Among them moved a young woman named Rose, her dark hair neatly tied back, her steps quick but never hurried as she balanced trays and remembered complex orders without missing a beat. For nearly 3 years, she had worked at this high-end Chicago restaurant, longer than most servers lasted in such a demanding environment. Table 7 needs more sparkling water, and 12 is ready for dessert menus, called out Tony, the floor manager, as Rose passed the service station. Got it, she replied with a quick nod, already planning her route through the busy dining room. What none of her coworkers knew, what nobody in her current life knew, was that Rose carried a secret. Behind her calm exterior and practiced smile lived the soul of an artist. Her fingers, now carrying plates and folding napkins, had once danced across piano keys with such skill that her teachers had spoken of international competitions and world-famous concert halls. Life had taken a sharp turn 3 years ago. Just months before graduating from one of the country's top music schools, her father had suffered a massive stroke. With medical bills piling up and her mother struggling to keep their small family business from sinking, Rose had made the painful choice to put her music education on hold and find work that could help support her family. "You'll go back someday," her mother had promised. Though they both suspected the opportunity might never come again, the world of classical music was unforgiving. A few years away could mean the difference between a brilliant career and being forgotten entirely. Tonight, like most Fridays, the restaurant was packed. Rose moved between tables with practiced ease, remembering which guest preferred extra ice, which one had mentioned a nut allergy, which businessman liked to impress clients with detailed questions about the wine list. These small details often meant better tips, and every extra dollar helped chip away at the mountain of student loans still hanging over her from her unfinished education. "Rose, VIP guest at table 9, Tony whispered as he passed. "Corner table. Very important. Mr. Thompson and his party." Rose glanced toward the indicated table and saw a group being seated in the restaurant's prime location, the corner, with the best view of both the city skyline and the antique grand piano that stood as a decorative piece, rarely played these days. At the center of the group sat an older gentleman in his 60s, silver-haired with a tailored suit that spoke of wealth beyond just money, the kind of old-world sophistication that couldn't be bought overnight. The man, Mr. Thompson, she assumed, carried himself with the easy confidence of someone used to being in charge. Around him sat 4 others who seemed to hang on his every word. Business associates perhaps, or maybe family members who benefited from his success. They laughed at his jokes with just a touch too much enthusiasm. As Rose approached their table, she put on her warmest professional smile. "Good evening and welcome to Bellini's. My name is Rose and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with something from our bar?" "The Macallan 25, neat," the silver-haired man said without looking at the menu. "And whatever these folks want." He gestured to his companions with casual generosity. As Rose took their drink orders, she noticed how Mr. Thompson's eyes kept drifting to the grand piano in the corner. There was something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition or perhaps nostalgia, that made her wonder about his story. The evening moved forward smoothly. Rose brought appetizers of seared scallops and truffle risotto, refilled water glasses before they emptied, and made wine recommendations that pleased even the most particular guest in the party. Throughout the meal, she noticed Mr. Thompson glancing repeatedly at the piano. After serving the main course, a delicate C bass for Mr. Thompson and various prime cuts for his companions, Rose was arranging their empty appetizer plates on her tray when the older gentleman's voice stopped her. "That piano," he said, gesturing with his glass. "Does anyone ever play it?" Rose paused, her professional mask slipping just slightly as an unexpected wave of longing washed over her. "Not often, sir. It's mainly for decoration these days. Seems a waste," he remarked, studying her face with surprising intensity. "A fine instrument like that sitting silent." "It is beautiful," Rose agreed, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the sudden ache in her chest. How long had it been since her fingers had touched keys of such quality? The small keyboard in her tiny apartment was a poor substitute for the real thing. "Do you play?" Mr. Thompson asked, catching her off guard. The question hung in the air. For a moment, Rose considered lying. It would be easier, safer somehow. But something in the man's direct gaze made dishonesty feel impossible. "I used to," she admitted quietly. Mr. Thompson smiled, a gleam of interest lighting his eyes. "Used to? People don't simply stop playing if they truly have music in them." His companions had fallen silent, watching the exchange with curious expressions. Rose became aware that nearby tables had quieted too, the restaurant's ambient noise level dropping as attention shifted to their corner. "Life happens," Rose said with a small shrug, trying to move the conversation back to safer ground. "Can I get you anything else with your main course?" But Mr. Thompson wasn't finished. He set down his fork and turned fully toward her, his expression unreadable. "What would you say if I made you an offer?" Rose blinked, uncertain. "Sir?" "A wager of sorts." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. With deliberate movements, he extracted several crisp bills and placed them on the table. $5,000 says you can't sit down at that piano and play something that will impress this room." A hush fell over the nearby tables as diners turned to watch. Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks as she became the center of unwanted attention. "I couldn't possibly," she began. "Can't? Or won't?" Mr. Thompson challenged, his eyes twinkling with something that wasn't entirely unkind. $5,000. Tax-free cash. Right now. Rose's mind raced. $5,000 was more than a month's salary with tips. It could cover next semester's worth of her brother's college tuition, or make a significant dent in her own lingering student debt. But the thought of playing again in public after so long— "I haven't practiced in years," she said softly. "Then the money should be safe with me, shouldn't it?" Mr. Thompson replied with a slight smile. By now, the entire restaurant had fallen quiet. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to see what was happening. Rose saw Tony watching nervously from near the bar, clearly concerned about the disruption, but unwilling to interfere with whatever was happening at the VIP table. Time seemed to slow as Rose considered her options. Play and potentially embarrass herself in front of the entire restaurant, or walk away from an amount of money that could make a real difference in her life. But beyond the money lay something else, an opportunity she had thought forever lost. The chance to touch real ivory keys again, to let music flow from her fingers, to remember who she had been before responsibility and hardship had reshaped her life. "The choice is yours," Mr. Thompson said, his voice gentler now. "No pressure. But sometimes life offers unexpected chances. The question is whether we're brave enough to take them." Rose looked at the piano. From where she stood, she could almost feel the weight of the keys beneath her fingers, could almost hear the notes waiting to be played. How many nights had she dreamed of playing again on an instrument like that? How many times had she passed by music stores and paused, listening to others play with a mixture of joy and heartache? Around the restaurant, diners watched with bated breath. Some looked embarrassed for her, others curious, a few even seemed to be silently cheering her on. In that moment, Rose realized that regardless of her decision, she would remember this night forever. Either as the evening she walked away from her passion once more, or as the night she found the courage to reclaim a piece of herself she thought was gone for good. With a deep breath, Rose set down her serving tray. The room held its collective breath as she slowly turned toward the piano. "I haven't played in public for a long time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That wasn't always the case, though, was it? Rose felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in his tone that suggested he might know more than he was letting on. Had he recognized her? But that was impossible. Her brief moment in the spotlight had been years ago in a different city, before life's responsibilities had pulled her away. As she approached the piano, memories flooded back. Countless hours of practice, the smell of polish on the wood, the feel of the metronome ticking away as she repeated passages until her fingers ached. She had once lived for those moments when everything else fell away and only the music remained. The piano bench felt both foreign and familiar as she sat down. Rose lifted the cover to reveal the keys, perfect ivory and ebony, waiting patiently. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, gathering courage, aware of every eye in the restaurant watching her. $5,000, Mr. Thompson called from his table. "If you can truly play." Rose closed her eyes. Money had forced her to abandon music once. How strange that money might now bring her back to it, even if just for a moment. Her fingers hovered over the keys. What would she play? Something technical to prove her skill? Something emotional to convey what music meant to her? In the end, she let instinct guide her, the way her first teacher had taught her. Music isn't just in your fingers, that teacher had said. It's in your heart. When you forget what comes next, your heart will remember. Rose took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys, hoping that after all this time her heart still remembered. The first note hung in the air like a question. Rose's finger trembled slightly as it pressed down, breaking years of silence. Then another note followed, and another, until her hands remembered their purpose and began to move with growing confidence across the keys. She had chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, not the most technically demanding piece, but one that allowed the emotion behind the playing to shine through. It was the first piece she had truly mastered, the one that had made her childhood teacher cry and say, "This is why we play." To make others feel. The restaurant remained utterly silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work, dishes and preparation forgotten as the unexpected music filled every corner of the space. Rose kept her eyes closed at first, too afraid to see the reactions of those watching. She focused instead on the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers, the gentle resistance as they gave way to her touch, the rich tones that emerged in response. As the piece progressed, something remarkable happened. The years of absence fell away. Her fingers, stiff at first, began to move with increasing fluidity, finding their way home to patterns once so familiar they had been like breathing. The music flowed through her, not perfect. A missed note here, a slightly rushed passage there, but alive with genuine feeling. Halfway through the piece, Rose finally gathered the courage to open her eyes. What she saw almost made her falter. The entire restaurant was transfixed. Servers stood frozen, trays in hand. Diners had put down their forks and turned in their seats. Near the bar, Tony the manager stood with his mouth slightly open, his previous concern replaced by astonishment. And at table 9, Mr. Thompson watched with an intensity that was almost physical, his eyes never leaving her hands. There was something in his expression beyond mere surprise, a knowing look, as if he had expected this all along. The piece drew to its gentle conclusion, the final notes lingering in the air like a held breath. For one terrible moment, there was complete silence. Rose's heart pounded in her chest. Had she embarrassed herself after all? Had the years away from music dulled her abilities more than she realized? Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then growing until it filled the restaurant. People were standing, smiling, some even wiping at their eyes. An older woman at a nearby table caught Rose's gaze and mouthed, "Thank you," with such sincerity that Rose felt a lump form in her throat. Mr. Thompson remained seated, watching her with that same inscrutable expression. When the applause began to die down, he raised his hand, silencing the room once more. "I believe," he said, his voice carrying easily through the now quiet space. "That was just a warm-up. Wouldn't you agree?" Rose stared at him, confused. "The Nocturne is lovely," he continued, "but I suspect you're capable of much more. Perhaps something that truly demonstrates what you can do." It was a challenge, plain and simple. Rose felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just the joy of playing, but the competitive spirit that had once driven her through countless hours of practice, the desire to prove herself that had pushed her to tackle increasingly difficult pieces. "I don't know if," she began. "The wager stands," Mr. Thompson said, adding casually, "In fact, let's make it 10,000. A murmur ran through the crowd. $10,000. It was an absurd amount of money for a few minutes of playing. Rose could pay off a significant portion of her student loans with that sum. She could help her parents with their mortgage payments. She could even buy a proper piano for her apartment. But it wasn't really about the money anymore. Something had awakened in her when her fingers touched the keys. A part of herself she had locked away, believing it was lost forever. Rose turned back to the piano. What could she play that would truly show what she was capable of? Her mind raced through her old repertoire. Pieces she had once known by heart. Would her fingers remember them after all this time? One piece came to mind, Liszt's La Campanella, notorious for its technical challenges. the lightning-fast notes and treacherous jumps between keys that had once made her practice until her hands cramped. It had been the showpiece of her final recital before everything changed. Without announcing her choice, Rose placed her hands on the keys once more and began to play. The familiar opening notes rang out like tiny bells, giving the piece its name. Then came the runs. Fingers flying across the keyboard at a speed that seemed impossible, each note distinct yet flowing into the next like water. She stumbled once early on, her fingers finding the wrong keys in a particularly difficult passage. A flash of embarrassment washed over her, but she pushed through it, refusing to stop. This wasn't about perfection anymore. This was about remembering who she had been, who she still was beneath the uniform and the practiced smile. As the piece progressed, something strange and wonderful happened. The muscle memory buried deep within her hands began to resurface. Her fingers found their way more confidently, leaping across octaves, trilling with increasing precision. The restaurant faded away, and Rose was transported back to practice rooms and recital halls, to the pure joy of making music that had once been the center of her life. When she reached the climactic section, her hands became a blur across the keys. Several diners gasped audibly. One of Mr. Thompson's companions whispered something to him, but the older man didn't respond, his attention fixed completely on Rose's performance. The final notes rang out, bright and clear, and Rose lifted her hands from the keys, suddenly aware that she was breathing hard, as if she had been running. Sweat had formed on her brow despite the restaurant's cool air conditioning. She felt simultaneously exhausted and more alive than she had in years. This time the applause was immediate and thunderous. People were standing, cheering, some even calling bravo. From the back of the room, a woman at a nearby table was openly crying. The kitchen staff had emerged fully now, line cooks in their white jackets applauding alongside the bartenders and hosts. Tony, the floor manager, stood near the entrance with a look of complete disbelief on his face. For nearly 3 years, he had known Rose only as a reliable server who never complained about difficult customers or double shifts. Now he was seeing her transformed, revealed as someone entirely different from who he thought she was. Rose turned to look at Mr. Thompson. The older man sat perfectly still amid the commotion, regarding her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket and removed his wallet once more. He counted out bills, more than before, and placed them on the table. When the applause finally began to subside, he stood up. The room quieted, waiting to hear what he would say. "Well done," he said simply. "You've more than earned this." Rose stood awkwardly beside the piano, suddenly aware of her waitress uniform, the small stain on the sleeve where a customer had bumped her arm earlier, causing her to spill a drop of red wine. She felt caught between two worlds, the life she had now and the one she had left behind. "May I ask?" Mr. Thompson said, his voice curious rather than demanding. "Why someone who plays like that is serving dinner at Bellini's?" The question hung in the air. Rose felt the eyes of the entire restaurant on her, waiting for her answer. How could she explain the complicated series of choices and necessities that had led her here? How could she describe the guilt she would have felt pursuing music while her family struggled? "Life doesn't always go as planned," she said finally, the simplicity of the statement somehow encompassing all the complexity behind it. Mr. Thompson nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he already knew. "And if life offered you another chance?" he asked. "What then?" Before Rose could respond, the maitre d' approached, looking flustered. "I'm sorry for the interruption," he said to the room at large, "but we have a restaurant to run. If our pianist could return to her duties." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd at the word pianist, and Rose felt her cheeks flush. She stepped away from the piano, smoothing down her uniform. "Of course," she said, "I should get back to work." But as she turned to go, Mr. Thompson's voice stopped her. "Miss," he called. When she looked back at him, he said, "We aren't finished talking. When does your shift end?" The rest of Rose's shift passed in a blur. News of her performance spread quickly through the restaurant, and diners who had arrived later kept glancing at her with curious expressions. Some even requested to be seated near the piano, perhaps hoping for an encore that wouldn't come. Her fellow servers peppered her with questions during brief moments in the kitchen or service area. "Where did you learn to play like that? Why didn't you ever tell us? Are you some kind of secret genius?" Rose answered with short, vague responses, too overwhelmed to explain. The weight of the $10,000 now tucked safely in her pocket, Felt both wonderful and strange. More money than she had ever held at once. Earned in just minutes doing something she once loved rather than hours of carrying plates and smiling through rude comments. Throughout it all, she was acutely aware of Mr. Thompson's presence. He and his party lingered over dessert and coffee, occasionally glancing in her direction. She could feel his eyes following her as she moved through the dining room, as if he was still evaluating her, still measuring her worth beyond what he had already seen. As the evening wore on, the restaurant gradually emptied. By 11:30, most of the diners had left and the staff was beginning the nightly cleanup. Rose had just finished rolling silverware for the next day's service when Tony approached her. "He's still here," the manager said, nodding toward the corner where Mr. Thompson sat alone, his companions long gone. "Says he's waiting for you. Everything okay?" "I think so," Rose said, though she wasn't entirely sure. "He wants to talk about the piano thing." Tony looked relieved. "Good. I was worried he might be complaining." Though after that performance, he shook his head in amazement. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" 3 years and we had no idea." Rose shrugged. "It never came up." "Never came up?" Tony laughed. "Most people would put that on their resume in big, bold letters. Can play piano like a concert pianist. Might have gotten you a different position." "I didn't want a different position," Rose said simply. "I needed reliable work with good tips." Tony studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, Mr. Thompson is one of our most valued customers. His company holds regular business dinners here. Whatever he wants to discuss, just remember that." The message was clear. Keep the VIP happy. Rose nodded and made her way to the corner table. Mr. Thompson looked up as she approached, his expression thoughtful. "Sit down, please," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. As Rose took a seat, he added, "I've ordered you a drink. Hope you don't mind." On cue, a server appeared with 2 glasses of amber liquid. Rose recognized the expensive scotch Mr. Thompson had been drinking earlier. "I don't usually," she began. "Tonight isn't usual," he interrupted, sliding 1 glass toward her. "Tonight calls for something special." Rose took the glass but didn't drink. "Why did you ask me to play?" she said. The question had been nagging at her all evening. Was it really just a random bet? Mr. Thompson smiled slightly. "Do you believe in coincidences, Rose?" "Sometimes," she answered cautiously. "I don't," he said firmly. "Not when it comes to talent like yours." He took a sip of his drink, then set it down carefully. "Tell me about your training." Rose hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "I started when I was 6. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families, and one of them had a piano. The wife noticed me watching their daughter's lessons and offered to let me try. After that, they couldn't keep you away from it," Mr. Thompson finished for her. Rose nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" "Because that's how it always is with true musicians. The instrument calls to them." He leaned forward. "You studied at Westridge Conservatory, didn't you?" Rose felt a chill run down her spine. "How could you possibly know that?" Instead of answering directly, Mr. Thompson reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. After a few taps, he turned it toward her. On the screen was a younger version of herself, seated at a grand piano on a concert stage, her face intense with concentration. "Westridge Spring Showcase 3 years ago," Mr. Thompson said. "You performed Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, brought the house down." Rose stared at the image, memories flooding back. That night had been one of her last performances before her father's stroke, before everything changed. She had been so full of hope then, so certain of her path forward. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Were you there?" Mr. Thompson shook his head. "No, but my daughter was." Catherine Thompson. The name hit Rose like a physical blow. Catherine Thompson had been 2 years ahead of her at Westridge, a brilliant violinist headed for a major symphony orchestra. They hadn't been close friends, but had performed together in several student ensembles. "Catherine recorded parts of the showcase," Mr. Thompson continued. "She sent me videos of performances she thought were exceptional. Yours was one of them." He put the phone away. "She spoke very highly of your talent." "I remember Catherine," Rose said, her mind racing to connect the dots. "But that doesn't explain why you're here, why you recognized me after all this time." Mr. Thompson took another sip of his drink. "I have an excellent memory for faces. When I saw you tonight, you seemed familiar, but I couldn't place you immediately. It was only when you mentioned playing piano that something clicked." He studied her carefully. "Catherine told me you were marked for greatness. One of the most promising pianists of your generation, according to your professors. Then you simply vanished from the program. No explanations, no forwarding address." Rose looked down at her untouched drink. "My father had a stroke. Medical bills piled up. My mother couldn't handle everything alone." The explanation sounded flat, inadequate to describe the chaos and fear of that time, the impossible choices she had faced. "So you gave up your scholarship, your future." "I chose my family," Rose corrected, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "It wasn't giving up. It was doing what needed to be done." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. "Noble, but what about now? Your playing tonight, even after years away from serious practice, was extraordinary. That kind of talent doesn't just disappear." "What are you asking?" "I'm asking what your plan is. Surely you don't intend to wait tables forever." Rose felt a flare of irritation. "There's nothing wrong with waiting tables. It's honest work." "Of course," Mr. Thompson said smoothly. "But it's not your work. Not what you were meant to do." "Meant to do?" Rose echoed. "That's a luxury not everyone gets to consider." Mr. Thompson leaned back, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "What if it wasn't a luxury? What if it was a possibility?" "I don't understand." "I sit on the board of the Riverside Music Foundation," he said. "We provide funding for promising musicians, particularly those who face financial barriers. Full scholarships, living stipends, instrument access, mentorship." He paused. "We could offer you a place." Rose felt suddenly dizzy, as if the floor was tilting beneath her. "A place? You mean a chance to complete your education, to pursue the career you were clearly destined for?" He said it matter-of-factly, as if he wasn't offering to completely transform her life. "I can't just—" Rose began, then stopped, not even sure how to articulate all the complications, all the responsibilities that bound her to her current path. "You can't just walk away from your obligations." "I understand that," Mr. Thompson said. "The foundation can work with you to address those concerns. If it's financial support for your family, we can arrange it. If it's flexible scheduling to allow you to help care for your father, that can be accommodated." Rose stared at him, suspicious now. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" "What's in it for you?" Mr. Thompson's expression softened slightly. "Do you know what the most satisfying thing about making money is, Rose? It's not the houses or cars or fancy restaurants." He gestured around them. "It's the ability to make things happen. To see potential withering on the vine and say, 'Not this time.'" He leaned forward again. "But if you're asking about my selfish motivations, and we all have them, then yes, there are benefits to the foundation for supporting exceptional talents. Our sponsored musicians perform at our events. They become ambassadors for our mission. Their successes become our successes." Rose took a small sip of her drink, finally needing something to steady herself. The liquid burned pleasantly down her throat. "This is a lot to process," she said after a moment. "Of course it is," Mr. Thompson agreed. "I don't expect an answer tonight. Take some time to think it over." He reached into his jacket again and produced a business card, placing it carefully on the table between them. "Call me when you're ready to discuss the details." As Rose picked up the card, her fingers still tingling from playing after so long, she felt as if she was standing at a crossroads. One path leading back to the life she had reluctantly built, the other stretching forward toward the dream she had abandoned. "And if I say no?" she asked quietly. Mr. Thompson stood, straightening his jacket. "Then you keep the $10,000 with my compliments and continue on as before. No pressure, no obligations." He buttoned his jacket and added, "But I don't think you'll say no." "Why is that?" "Because I saw your face when you were playing," he said simply. That wasn't just a skill being demonstrated. That was someone coming home after a long absence. He nodded once, politely. "Good night, Rose. I look forward to hearing from you." As he walked away, Rose remained seated, the business card in one hand, the weight of possibility pressing down on her like a physical thing, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Rose didn't call Mr. Thompson the next day, or the day after that. Instead, she tucked his business card into her wallet beside the neatly folded bills he had given her, and tried to return to normal life. But normal had shifted somehow, like furniture rearranged in a familiar room. Everything technically in the same place, but suddenly strange to navigate. At work, things had changed. Customers who had witnessed her performance now requested her section, some even asking if she would play again. Tony had pulled her aside to suggest they might arrange for her to perform regularly, perhaps for a small increase in pay. "Think about it," he had said. "Could be good for business." Her fellow servers treated her differently too, with a mixture of admiration and curiosity that made her uncomfortable. The version of herself she had carefully constructed over the past 3 years. Efficient, unremarkable, just another waitress getting through her shift, had been shattered in a single evening. A week after her encounter with Mr. Thompson, Rose finally gathered the courage to visit her parents. Their small house in a modest neighborhood on the city's outskirts was where she had grown up, though it looked different now. The ramp leading to the front door, the grab bars in the hallway, the hospital bed in what had once been the dining room, all reminders of how life had changed after her father's stroke. Her mother greeted her at the door with a tired smile. At 58, she looked closer to 70, the past 3 years having carved deep lines around her eyes and mouth. "There she is," her mother said, embracing her. "We missed you at Sunday dinner." "Sorry," Rose said, feeling a pang of guilt. She had been avoiding her family since the incident at the restaurant, unsure how to explain what had happened, what might happen next. Work was busy. In the living room, her father sat in his wheelchair near the window. Half his body remained paralyzed and his speech was slurred, but his mind was as sharp as ever. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "Rose," he managed, the words slightly distorted but filled with warmth. She kissed his forehead. "Hi, Dad." "You look different," her mother observed as they settled in. "Something happen?" Rose hesitated. Her mother had always been perceptive. "Kind of," she admitted. "Something at work." Over cups of tea, Rose told them the story, the dare, the performance, Mr. Thompson's offer. As she spoke, she watched their expressions shift from surprise to wonder to a cautious hope. When she finished, silence filled the room. Finally, her father laboriously lifted his good hand and pointed to the cabinet across the room. "Top drawer," he said. Rose's mother understood immediately. She went to the cabinet and opened the top drawer, removing a worn folder. "Your father's been keeping these," she explained, handing it to Rose. Inside were newspaper clippings, concert programs, certificates from music competitions, a paper trail of the path Rose had been on before everything changed. Her father had saved every mention of her musical accomplishments, creating a record of the dream she had set aside. "He never wanted you to quit," her mother said softly. "Neither of us did." "I had to," Rose replied, the old justification rising automatically to her lips. "The medical bills, the mortgage—" "We know why you did it," her mother interrupted. "And we've been grateful every day for your sacrifice. But we never wanted your whole future to be the price of helping us." Her father made a sound of agreement, his good hand reaching for hers. When she took it, his grip was surprisingly strong. "This Thompson man," her mother said. "You think his offer is genuine?" Rose nodded slowly. "I looked up the Riverside Music Foundation. It's real, respected. They've helped launch several major careers. Then why haven't you called him?" The question hung in the air. Rose stared down at the folder in her lap, at the younger version of herself smiling from a recital program. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. "Of what?" her mother asked gently. "Of everything. Of failing. Of succeeding." Rose took a deep breath. "I've spent 3 years telling myself that chapter of my life was closed, that I had to be practical, responsible. What if I can't go back? What if I've lost whatever made me special?" Her father made a sound that caught her attention. With visible effort, he formed his next words carefully. "Never gone," he said, tapping his chest. "In here." Rose felt tears prick at her eyes. "But what about you two? I can't just abandon you." Her mother's expression softened. "Is that what you think would happen? That helping yourself means abandoning us?" She shook her head. "We're not as fragile as you think. We managed before you stepped in and we'll manage now. The medical bills are mostly covered by insurance now that we've figured out the system," her mother finished. "Your brother helps when he can. We're making it work." She reached across and squeezed Rose's knee. "We didn't raise you to put your life on hold forever." Rose looked down at the folder again, at the evidence of a path interrupted. "I don't even know if I can do it anymore. Get back to that level. Only one way to find out." her mother said simply. They talked for hours after that, weighing possibilities, addressing fears. By the time Rose left that evening, the business card in her wallet felt less like a fantasy and more like a key, one she might actually have the courage to use. The next morning, she called the number. Mr. Thompson answered on the second ring as if he had been expecting her call. "I was beginning to think you decided against it," he said by way of greeting. "I needed time to think," Rose replied. "To talk to my family." "And what did they say?" "They told me to call you." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Smart people, your family. When can you come in to discuss details?" 2 days later, Rose found herself in the downtown offices of the Riverside Music Foundation. The space was modern and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city skyline. In glass cases along the walls, instruments and music memorabilia were displayed like museum pieces. A violin once played by a famous soloist, handwritten sheet music from a renowned composer, photographs of musicians from around the world. Mr. Thompson greeted her in the reception area, dressed in another immaculate suit. "Thank you for coming," he said, shaking her hand. "There are some people I'd like you to meet." He led her to a conference room where 3 people waited: an older woman with silver hair cut in a stylish bob, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses, and a younger woman who looked startlingly familiar. "Rose," Mr. Thompson said, "this is Dr. Eleanor Wright, our musical director. Dr. Peter Chen, head of our scholarship committee, and my daughter, Catherine." Catherine Thompson stepped forward with a warm smile. "It's good to see you again, Rose. It's been too long." Rose stared at her former schoolmate, now more poised and professional than the student she remembered. "You recognized me that night at the restaurant? You were with your father?" Catherine nodded. "As soon as you walked up to our table, I thought it might be you, but I wasn't entirely sure. It had been years and people change. I mentioned it to Dad and he decided to test the theory. Hence the dare," Rose said, understanding dawning. "Not my most subtle moment," Mr. Thompson admitted with a small smile. "But effective." Dr. Wright stepped forward. "We've reviewed your academic records from Westridge," she said without preamble. "Exemplary. And your performance at the restaurant, which Catherine was thoughtful enough to record discreetly on her phone, shows that your talent remains intact, if a bit rusty from disuse." Rose felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I missed some notes in the list. Yet you played it from memory after years away from serious practice," Dr. Chen observed. "Most accomplished pianists would struggle with that piece even with regular training." They sat around the conference table, and for the next hour, the group outlined what the foundation could offer: a full scholarship to complete her degree at Westridge or another institution of her choice, a monthly stipend to cover living expenses, access to practice facilities and instruments, performance opportunities with the foundation's concert series, and perhaps most importantly, a special family support fund that would ensure her parents' needs were met. "We understand that your family obligations are important to you," Dr. Wright explained. "This program is designed to remove barriers, not create new ones." As the meeting concluded, they asked if she had any questions. "Just one," Rose said. "Why me? There must be hundreds of talented musicians who need support." The 4 exchanged glances. Finally, Catherine spoke. "When you left Westridge, one of our professors said it was like watching a star go out. That kind of talent doesn't come along often. When it does, and when circumstances rather than choice have dimmed it," she shrugged. "That's exactly why this foundation exists." Mr. Thompson stood. "We don't expect an immediate answer. Take some time, discuss it with your family." But Rose had already made her decision during the meeting, watching these people who believed in her talent enough to offer her a second chance. The memory of the piano keys beneath her fingers at the restaurant had awakened something that couldn't be put back to sleep. "I don't need more time," she said, rising to her feet. "I want to accept your offer." Dr. Wright broke into a broad smile. "Excellent. We can begin the paperwork immediately." As they filed out of the conference room, Catherine hung back to walk beside Rose. "There's just one more thing," she said quietly. "A condition that comes with the scholarship." Rose tensed, waiting. Catherine's eyes twinkled. "You have to play at my wedding next spring. I always said if I ever found you again, I'd want you to be the one playing when I walk down the aisle." Rose laughed, relief washing over her. "I think I can manage that." Outside the foundation's offices, standing on the busy downtown sidewalk, Rose pulled out her phone to call the restaurant. It was time to give notice. As she waited for someone to answer, she looked up at the clear blue sky and felt, for the first time in years, that her path was clear as well. 18 months later, Rose stood backstage at Wilson Hall, the premier concert venue in the city. Through the thick curtain, she could hear the murmur of the audience as they settled into their seats. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a rhythm far more frantic than the piece she was about to perform. 5 minutes, the stage manager said, passing by with a clipboard and a reassuring smile. Rose nodded, smoothing down the front of her black concert dress, another gift from the Riverside Music Foundation. Everything about this night had been arranged by them, from the venue to the program to the reception that would follow. Tonight marked her official debut as a foundation-sponsored artist, the culmination of a year and a half of intensive work. Those months had been among the most challenging and rewarding of her life. Returning to Westridge Conservatory as an older student had been strange at first. Most of her classmates were younger, straight from high school or early undergrad programs, their fingers limber and well-practiced. Rose had felt the weight of her 3-year absence in every stiff joint, every forgotten passage, every moment of uncertainty. But what she lacked in recent practice, she made up for in maturity and determination. While the younger students complained about early morning classes or demanding professors, Rose embraced every opportunity, every criticism, every chance to improve. She had already lived the alternative, already knew what it meant to have music taken away, and that knowledge fueled her with a passion her instructors quickly recognized and respected. A light touch on her shoulder pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to find Catherine Thompson standing behind her, elegant in a deep blue evening gown. "Nervous?" Catherine asked. Rose laughed softly. "Terrified," she admitted. "But in a good way." "You'll be magnificent," Catherine said with certainty. "You were wonderful at my wedding, and this is your moment to truly shine." Rose smiled at the memory of Catherine's spring wedding 6 months earlier. Playing Pachelbel's Canon as the bride walked down the aisle had been her first semi-public performance since returning to her studies. The small intimate gathering had been the perfect stepping stone to tonight's much larger audience. "Your father isn't here yet," Rose observed, glancing toward the private box visible from her position in the wings. The seat reserved for Mr. Thompson remained empty. Catherine checked her watch. "Board meeting. He promised he wouldn't miss your performance, though. He's been talking about tonight for weeks." She squeezed Rose's arm encouragingly. "Everyone who matters is here. Look." She guided Rose to peek through a small gap in the curtains. In the front row sat Rose's parents, her mother elegant in a borrowed dress, her father in his wheelchair but wearing a new suit, his eyes bright with anticipation. Beside them was Rose's brother, who had flown in from the West Coast for the occasion. And scattered throughout the audience were faces Rose recognized, former professors from before her hiatus, new instructors who had guided her return, even a few of her old co-workers from Bellini's restaurant. Tony among them. 3 minutes, the stage manager called. Catherine gave Rose a quick hug. "Break a leg," she whispered before hurrying to join her family in their box. Left alone, Rose closed her eyes and took several deep breaths, using the centering technique her new performance coach had taught her. The past 18 months replayed in her mind like a montage. The tearful resignation from the restaurant, the joyful return to Westridge, the painful rebuilding of her technique, the gradual revival of her musical instincts. There had been setbacks and triumphs, moments of doubt and moments of breakthrough. Through it all, Mr. Thompson and the foundation had kept their word. Her parents' medical needs were covered. Her father had access to better therapy programs than they could have afforded before. Her mother had been able to reduce her working hours. The monthly stipend ensured Rose could focus entirely on her studies, without the exhaustion of holding down a restaurant job on the side. "Places," the stage manager whispered. Rose opened her eyes. This was it. The moment she had been working toward, the heavy curtain rose. The spotlight found her as she walked to center stage, its warmth on her skin a reminder that all eyes were now on her. The magnificent grand piano waited, its polished surface gleaming under the lights. She took her position on the bench, adjusted it slightly, and looked out at the audience. In that moment before her fingers touched the keys, Rose spotted movement in the Thompson family box. Mr. Thompson had arrived, slightly out of breath, taking his seat just in time. He caught her eye and gave a small nod of encouragement. Rose turned to the piano. She had chosen to begin with Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that told a story without words, full of drama and emotion, technical challenges and moments of pure beauty. It seemed fitting for her own journey. Her fingers found the opening notes and everything else fell away. There was only the music now, the conversation between her hands and the keys between her heart and the audience. Each phrase flowed into the next with a certainty that came from countless hours of practice, but also from something deeper, something that had been waiting patiently within her during those years away from music. As the piece built toward its thunderous conclusion, Rose felt a sense of rightness wash over her. This was where she belonged. This was what she was meant to do. The final chords rang out, powerful and resolute, and then silence. That magical moment between the end of a piece and the audience's reaction, a held breath of collective emotion. Then came the applause, immediate and enthusiastic, washing over her in waves. Rose stood to acknowledge it, her eyes finding her parents in the front row. Her mother was openly weeping. Her father's good arm was raised as high as he could manage, his face alight with pride. The concert continued, Debussy, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, each piece received with growing appreciation. For the finale, Rose had chosen Liszt's La Campanella, the very piece she had played during Mr. Thompson's dare at the restaurant. But this time there were no missed notes, no hesitations. The piece sparkled and danced under her fingers, a joyful declaration of her return to the world of music. The standing ovation lasted for minutes. Rose accepted bouquet after bouquet until her arms were full of flowers. As she took her final bow and the curtain began to close, she caught sight of Mr. Thompson standing in his box, his face showing something that looked remarkably like fatherly pride. At the reception afterward, well-wishers surrounded Rose, offering congratulations and praise. Critics in attendance spoke of her remarkable technique and emotional maturity. A representative from the city symphony mentioned possible collaboration. A recording company executive slipped her his card. Through it all, Rose felt a strange sense of calm. This was only the beginning, she knew. There would be more concerts, more challenges, a whole career to build. But the hardest step had already been taken. That moment of courage when she'd set down her serving tray and walked to the piano in a busy restaurant, accepting a dare that would change her life. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Mr. Thompson found her by the champagne table. "Congratulations," he said simply. "You were extraordinary." "Thank you," Rose replied. "For everything." He waved away her gratitude. "I only opened a door. You walked through it." He studied her for a moment, then added, "You know, when I first saw you at the restaurant, I thought I was helping someone reclaim a lost dream. I didn't realize then that I was witnessing the beginning of something much bigger." Before Rose could respond, her parents approached, her father's wheelchair guided by her mother. "Rose," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion, "we are so proud of you." Her father reached for her hand, squeezing it with all the strength he could muster. "Beautiful," he managed to say, the word clear despite his speech difficulties. Mr. Thompson stepped back, allowing the family their moment. As he did, a young woman approached him, one of the conservatory students who had attended the performance. "Mr. Thompson," the girl said nervously, "I just wanted to thank you for the foundation's support of the student programs. Tonight's concert was inspiring." Rose watched as Mr. Thompson engaged the student in conversation, asking about her studies, her instrument, her goals. She recognized the look. "I